Hello and welcome to Taboo Talks. This is the first of our monthly podcast and we're going to be exploring opinions surrounding the topics we've covered this month. We want your comments, so make sure you send them in to our social media channels. So first off, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Beth.
I'm Martina.
And I'm Catherine.
And today we're going to be talking about the topics we've covered so far, which are feminism, gender pronouns, assisted dying and trans rights.
So I had a look at feminism to start with. I was looking about female suffrage in the 21st century, whether it's still relevant to today. And as part of this, I went to an event in Lincoln, which was celebrating 100 years since women got the vote. So as we did a procession down the high street, and during this we were singing a protest song.
Oh dear, what can the matter be? Dear, dear, what can the matter be? Oh dear, what can the matter be? In our wanting the vote. What can the matter be? What can the matter be? What can the matter be? In our wanting the vote.
So what was it like to be part of that procession then, Catherine?
It was actually quite interesting because I've never done something like that before, and there were so many people there. I'm not entirely sure the exact figures, but there was loads of us walking down the high street, everybody singing, people were coming out of the pubs and shops and stuff and looking and asking what we were doing. And it was one of those things where the atmosphere was so good. It didn't matter that it was like raining and really windy. It's just sort of the people were so passionate about what they were singing about, so it was a really interesting experience. And we marched down the high street, and when we got to Speaker's Corner there was a performance. Let's have a listen.
We talked about honouring the past. We talked about legacy. We talked about our hopes.
We talked about education and status, about power and privilege, sexuality, rights and democracy, about choosing where you stand and about not being afraid.
We talked about hope. We raised our voices.
We talked about the history. We talked about power in unity. We talked about humour and empathy and compassion.
We talked about lots of small voices, strong, together. We talked about how the world is changing, and we talked about our own enemies.
That was really interesting. So has it made you reflect on feminism in the 21st century?
Yeah, I think it did, because I spoke to the people who performed afterwards and it was so inspiring to hear their opinions, and it's obviously still an issue that they feel very affected by today. And we've got things like equal pay campaigns, the Me Too movement, and even though we're not sort of fighting for the right to vote anymore, I feel like feminism is still something that does need to be talked about. But what would you two think?
Yeah, I agree. I think feminism has now turned from this positive thing to more like a negative, where if you say I'm a feminist, people think that you're hating on men, but it's not that. It's about equality for both genders.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a shame that some people spin it as kind of a man-hating movement when there is definitely still a need for it. There's lots of issues that continue, like the gender pay gap and sexual assault and other forms of prejudice and discrimination. So it's really good that there's local groups like that still bringing attention to it.
And that's a very interesting point as well, because the women I did speak to, they did say we don't like the fact that we have to justifying that we're not anti-men. It's sort of people still aren't seeing that it's about equality.
Well, it's good that we have movements like that, not only nationally but locally, because it is educating people more and bringing attention. And even you said people walked out of shops and asked what's happening, so I think that's a positive step forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it's good that local groups are still bringing attention to the issue of feminism and showing that it is about equality. So if you've got any opinions about feminism and its relevance in today's society, do let us know. You can drop us a message on our Facebook page, our Twitter page, send us an email, or reply to the contact form on our website. And we're keen to know what you think. So moving on, our next topic that we covered was pronouns. Beth, you covered this one. Would you like to tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so I've been looking into the arguments surrounding the use of gender-neutral pronouns. So that includes words like they. This is something that's been in the media a lot recently. I feel like there's quite a lot of controversy surrounding it. Some people find it quite hard to adjust to using anything other than he and she as pronouns. So I've been speaking to Faye Jones, who is a non-binary person from London who feels that the issue has been blown out of proportion by the media and that the media is trying to scare people about making mistakes when it comes to pronouns. This is what they had to say.
It's quite a simple issue of if someone asks you, can you please refer to me as this? If you make the effort, if you genuinely try, whether you make some mistakes or not, that's fine. Just as long as you can honestly say that you are trying, then that's okay. The issue begins where people just blatantly refuse. People will try to make it seem like, well, if you get it wrong, then LGBT people are going to hate you. No, we don't hate you. The issue begins where you don't attempt to try in the first place.
So yeah, I think this is quite a new area for me. I've found it hard to adjust to saying anything other than he and she, but I feel like they isn't that much of a stretch and it's not that hard to apply. But like Faye said, I do feel that the media's blown this out of proportion and made it seem like everyone's supposed to just know just by looking at someone how they want to be referred to, when Faye makes it sound like that's not the case. What do you guys think?
I think that's a fair point because, like you said, I think I would find it hard maybe to adjust. I wouldn't know by looking at somebody whether they want to be called he, she or they. But I think once somebody said to me, no, actually, could you call me they? I'd be fine, okay, I'll respect your wishes and I'll call you they, because it's no bother to me to call somebody what they want to be called. Like, what, it doesn't affect my life. So why would I do something that would upset somebody?
Yeah, I think a lot of the issues regarding this topic come from confusion. People don't understand it, so that results in hate. But I feel like maybe rather than resorting to that, if you don't understand something, you need to ask someone about it and ask how they want to be referred to, rather than being hateful and not understanding them.
So it seems that we all seem to agree on this topic, and it's good that we've spoken to Faye because it's bringing light to this. But for the sake of including the counter argument, let's talk about why people might disagree or have different views about it. I have seen a video of Piers Morgan on Good Morning Britain, and he was saying that people are buying into this idea that gender is an offensive thing and we can no longer call girls girls and boys boys, and why are we confusing people with, or especially children, with this gender clash.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that argument put forward on Twitter and Facebook and other social media, that why do we need more than he and she? Why are we introducing other genders? Is that confusing children? I think it's important to remember that no one's forcing you to change your gender. All people are asking for, all people like Faye are asking for, is to be understood and for people to be more open and not to assume who they are just by looking at them, I suppose. So if you have any opinions on gender pronouns, and specifically gender neutral pronouns, get in touch with us online on social media or drop us an email. We're keen to hear from you no matter what your opinion is, so get in touch. Now we'll move on to our next topic, which is assisted dying, which Catherine has been covering. This is obviously a really sensitive topic, and Catherine has spoken to both sides, which is really interesting. How have you found that?
Well, Beth, like you said, I did talk to both sides of the debate. The first campaign group I talked to was Care Not Killing. This is an alliance which is against changing the law in the UK, and here's what Alistair had to say.
If you look at what's happening in places like Belgium and Holland, which have a euthanasia system, or indeed looking at places like Oregon and Washington, which have an assisted suicide system, we see that a huge number of people who are ending their lives prematurely are doing so not because of the conditions that they have, but because they fear becoming a burden.
Alistair spoke there about people are thinking that they're becoming a burden if they're terminally ill, and that's why they're choosing assisted dying, which obviously is not the right reasons. And he's saying that sort of vulnerable people then get put at risk. But then obviously the other side of the debate is terminally ill people who want a choice. And I spoke to Ellie from Dignity in Dying, and this is what she had to say.
We believe that, and the evidence shows, that the current law in the UK is broken and outdated. We know that many terminally ill people are forced to suffer under the current law. They aren't given the choice and control that they want at the end of their lives. And often they're forced to take matters into their own hands. Just because assisted dying isn't legal in this country doesn't mean it doesn't happen.
Obviously, Ellie there is then talking about terminally ill people having a choice and being able to choose an assisted death if that is the way they want to go. I think this was quite a tricky subject to cover, but it's also quite interesting, and it's quite enlightening to hear both sides of the argument, because it's not really something that you think about a lot. Personally, I don't come down hard on either side of this topic, because I think it is quite a big one with a lot of issues on each side to weigh up. But what do you guys think?
Well, yeah, I completely agree that this is a really tough topic. I personally do think there are situations where people should be able to choose to die rather than to suffer, for example in the late stages of terminal cancer or something like that. But the argument for better palliative care is a good one, and people shouldn't feel like they have to take their lives because they're a burden to other people. We should have better care in place if that's how people are feeling. It definitely is a really tough one to come to a conclusion on. There's a lot of arguments surrounding it, and I know that some of those come from a religious perspective. So Martina, how would you look at this topic from a religious point of view?
To me personally, being brought up as a Catholic, the topic of death, it was been taught a little bit differently, and to me, God has made us and we're his children, and life is sacred, and only he made us, and only he can take our life away. But we're here for some sort of reason. We don't know why, and we don't know what our mission is on this, and our life is trying to figure it out. But sometimes there is pain and suffering, and we don't always understand why things happen that way. And people who might not be religious might be harder to understand as well. But for me, I have to continue to trust in God and his plan.
So does that mean then that you believe that we should be improving end-of-life care and widening access to it?
Personally, I don't know much about it, and I haven't really come across that in my life. But to me, we should be looking after people no matter what, if they're ill or if they're healthy. And is life really valuable only when it's healthy? It's only also valuable when it's not. So we should be looking after those people who are ill as well.
That's a really interesting point, Martina. However, somebody has raised a counterpoint to this online. Jason commented on the website saying, despite the best palliative care in the world, we still have people who rightly want choice over their own deaths. Even if palliative care in this country were perfect, if such a thing exists, this would still be the case. People who are suffering unbearably and incurably deserve a choice, and it's time the politicians acknowledge this. And obviously he is then talking about changing the laws on assisted dying. I do think as well that's an important thing to raise, the choice aspect of it, and if somebody is terminally ill, should they have the choice of how they die?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to what I was saying before about if someone is really terminally ill and they're in the end stages and they're in a lot of pain and suffering, there is definitely an argument to be had to say, why should they have to go through that? Why should they not have a dignified end? I know it's a bit of a stereotype, but there's lots of comments online as well saying that, oh well, if a dog is really suffering, we put them to sleep, when we won't even do that with humans. We're valuing a dog's pain and suffering more than a human's. So I think that's an interesting point to look at as well.
Well, the other counter argument is that if there were changes in the law, then people might feel pressured to make certain choices, and that obviously builds a new risk involved if those changes come about.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's definitely really easy to go back and forth on this issue.
Yeah, like we have been doing as well. If you've got any comments that you'd like to add to this and get yourself involved in the debate, get in touch with us like we've mentioned previously with our other topics on social media or by email. And obviously if you are affected by any of the issues that we have discussed, contact the Samaritans on 116 123 from any phone, or you can visit their website as well. And our final topic for today is trans rights. This is one that Beth was investigating, and specifically looking at how trans people have been drawn into the conversation about consent. Beth, would you like to explain a little bit more about what you learned?
Yeah, this has been a very interesting but tough topic to cover. There's been some accusations in news and social media that trans people who are gay are forcing other gay people into sexual relationships before they've medically transitioned. So an example would be a trans woman who still has a penis wanting to have sex with another lesbian. So I have spoken to both sides of this argument. The first person I spoke to was Angela Wild, who is an organiser from the Get the L Out campaign, who campaigned against the trans rights movement at London Pride this year. They feel the trans movement is leading to something they call lesbian erasure. This is what she had to say.
There is a huge pressure on lesbians, particularly maybe on younger lesbians who are very vulnerable, to to accept male-bodied people as sexual partners because these male-bodied people say they identify as lesbians. It means that within the LGBT today, for a woman, it's impossible to call herself a lesbian and say, I am exclusively attracted to female. I don't want to have any relationship with men. I don't want to have relationship with people who have or ever had a penis. This is actually called now transphobic.
So, of course, no one should be pressured into having sex with anyone. I don't feel like anyone needs to give a reason why they wouldn't want to have sex with someone. No means no at the end of the day. But I thought it would be interesting to look into this a bit further to find out whether this is really happening and how much it's happening. So I've spoken to a trans woman called Anna Lee over Twitter. She's from Kentucky in the US, and she's said, "This is the first time anyone has brought this argument against transgender women to me. We would have to look at the individuals involved and how they handle the situation. Is one person using transphobic language when turning down another individual? Is one person being forceful in their advances? If this was a major issue, as is claimed, the majority of lesbians would reject the transgender movement instead of embracing it."
So that's two very interesting sides to the argument there, and something I hadn't really considered before, and both raise valid points. I think everybody has to consent to the situation. Obviously, consent is the biggest thing here. You can't force somebody into doing something they're not comfortable with. But then also it must be very difficult if you are transgender to then be turned down in a transphobic way if you haven't fully transitioned yet. And obviously that, again, is not something that should be happening.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely about both sides taking responsibility. No one should force someone else into sex, no matter what. But equally, there's no need to use transphobic language when turning somebody down.
So Angela has also brought up the topic of lesbian erasure, saying that trans rights movement are contradicting lesbian rights. Beth, as a gay woman, what is your perspective on this?
Well, if there are gay women who feel they've been pressured by someone into having sex, I do sympathise with them. But I feel like, again, maybe this is something that's been blown out of proportion. These women have a right to confront whoever did that to them, but the way they've accused the entire trans movement of causing problems is really unfair. I think the trans movement as a whole faces a lot of issues as it is, and being kind of like criticised from within the LGBT community itself must be really damaging to them and must make them feel even worse, because that's a group that's supposed to love and accept them. So I think a lot of people also forget that trans people historically were very responsible for starting the Pride parades in the first place, so it must be quite a bitter feeling for them to be protested against at Pride.
So this is a debate that does have quite a lot of viewpoints with it, but I think one of the biggest things does seem to be consent, and I think as long as you are sleeping with who you want to sleep with, then there shouldn't be such an issue. I think as long as everybody is comfortable with the situation, then it doesn't need to be a problem.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. If you are listening to this and you have been affected by any of the issues we've discussed today regarding gender or trans rights, you can contact the Switchboard LGBT Plus helpline on 0300 330 0630, or you can go to their website to find out more.
Okay, and I think that brings our conversation today to an end. We hope you've enjoyed listening to our slightly different perspective. If you missed any of the articles, you can find them over on our website. Next month, we'll be looking at male mental health, climate change deniers and veganism, so make sure you stay tuned to the site and check out what we're uploading, and let us know your thoughts as well via Facebook, Twitter or email. And we're also really wanting Piers Morgan to talk to us about veganism, so give us a hand and tweet Piers and tell him to reply to Taboo Topics. Stay tuned for the next episode of Taboo Talks, but for now it's bye from me
and me
and me,
and we'll be back with you next month for more debates.